Look around you. Watch the frantic, endless dance of the modern world. Observe the outrage, the passion, the desperate clamor for validation, the tears of triumph, and the screams of defeat. Society has sold you an intoxicating lie, wrapped in the comforting warmth of human sentiment. The belief that those who feel the deepest, those who shout the loudest, and those whose passions burn the brightest are the ones who change the world. You are taught to revere the fire of emotion. You are conditioned to believe that your feelings are your ultimate truth, your compass, and your power. But step back into the shadows for a moment. Look past the blinding glare of the arena and peer into the quiet, dimly lit boxes high above the fray. The loud do not rule. The passionate do not govern. They are merely the entertainment. The world, its economies, its hierarchies, its hidden architectures of power, is quietly, ruthlessly controlled by the emotionless thinkers. Welcome to the trap. It is a snare not made of iron or steel, but woven from the very neurochemistry of the masses. The trap is your own nervous system. Every time you react in anger, every time you weep in despair, every time you act on the intoxicating impulse of a fleeting joy, you reveal your levers. You show the architects of the system exactly where your strings are attached. Emotion is a reaction, and a reaction is inherently predictable. If you can be made to feel, you can be made to move. If you can be made to move, you can be controlled. The emotionless thinker understands this with chilling clarity. Do not mistake them for simple villains or hollow psychopaths. Such labels are merely comfort blankets for those who cannot comprehend true detachment. The emotionless thinker is a cold architect. They do not lack the capacity to understand human feeling. Rather, they have mastered the art of bypassing it. While the emotional man is blinded by the red mist of fury or the golden haze of euphoria, the emotionless thinker sees only the raw, unvarnished geometry of reality. They view the world not as a tapestry of human drama, but as a chessboard governed by strict, immutable laws of cause and effect. Consider the anatomy of a systemic trap. How does a single individual or a quiet collective of minds steer the destiny of thousands? They do not do it by forcing compliance. They do it by designing the environment in which you freely choose to trap yourself. They engineer scenarios that provoke a predictable emotional response. They build the arena, set the stakes, and then step back into the shadows. When the masses riot, when markets panic, when political zealots tear each other apart over manufactured ideologies, the emotionless thinker does not join the fray. They sit in the profound, heavy silence between the noise. They watch the emotional exhaust themselves burn through their resources and expose their vulnerabilities. And when the dust settles and the passionate are left gasping for air, the cold architect quietly steps in to claim the territory. History has always belonged to the Stoic king, not the raging warlord. The warlord may win a bloody battle, driven by the adrenaline of vengeance and the heat of the sun. But the warlord is a slave to his own momentum. The Stoic king, sitting motionless on his throne in a dimly lit hall, his face obscured by the shadows of a crown of thorns, owns the map. The king understands that true power is not the exertion of force, but the conservation of energy. He allows his enemies to destroy themselves with their own fiery passions. He turns their anger into his weapon, their fear into his shield, and their hope into his bait. In the grand architecture of society, systems are designed to extract emotional labor from the many to consolidate power for the few. Think of the algorithms that feed your daily digital consumption, the political rhetorics that divide your communities, the economic pressures that keep you in a state of perpetual, anxious motion. These are not accidents of nature. They are meticulously crafted mechanisms. The architects of these systems do not feel anger when you insult them. They do not feel pity when you struggle. They calculate. They measure the input of your outrage and the output of their profit. They are immune to the chaos because they are the ones who programmed the variables. Your indignation is a data point. Your passion is a metric of engagement. Your profound, heartfelt beliefs are merely predictable vectors on their ancient, sprawling map of human behavior. This is the chilling realization that must wash over you if you are ever to break free. You are playing a game whose rules were written by someone who never gets angry, never cries, and never acts out of spite. They do not care if you think they are right or wrong. Moral judgments are the luxury of the powerless. They only care about leverage. When you approach the world with a heart full of fire, you are bringing a torch to a vacuum. It will simply be snuffed out. To confront the system, to even begin to perceive the invisible bars of the cage that surrounds you, you must first learn to freeze the blood in your own veins. You must learn to look at the board not as a pawn fighting for survival, but as the player looking down from above. The trap is set. The bait is your own desperate need to feel alive, to be right, to be validated by the crowd. The moment you react, the jaws snap shut. You become another cog in the vast, silent machinery of their design. The emotionless thinker sits at the center of this web, draped in the heavy gold chains of invisible authority, their hands resting calmly on the ancient texts of human manipulation. They are waiting for you to make a move. They are waiting for you to feel. Will you continue to dance to the frantic rhythm of your own pulse, a willing victim of your own passions? Or will you step into the chilling, quiet dark where the real game is played? The path to systemic power begins with a singular, terrifying death, the death of your emotional reactivity. Only in the cold, absolute silence of a calculating mind can you begin to hear the turning of the gears. Welcome to the first lesson. Welcome to the ice. History is a grand theatrical illusion. We are taught from a young age to view the timeline of humanity through the lens of fire and passion. We are handed narratives of furious warlords, weeping martyrs, fiery revolutionaries, and romantic conquerors who charged across continents on horseback, their swords raised high, their hearts bursting with visceral emotion. We are told that passion moves the world. We are told that anger, love, and righteous fury are the engines of historical change. This is a lie. It is a beautiful, intoxicating lie, carefully preserved to keep the emotional masses distracted by the noise of their own beating hearts. The truth of history is profoundly quieter. The truth is chilling. If you look past the blood-soaked battlefields and the roaring crowds, if you peer into the dimly lit, silent rooms where the real trajectory of human existence was drawn, you will not find passionate men. You will find the emotionless thinkers. You will find the architects of the invisible cage. Chapter 2 marks the historical pivot, the exact psychological threshold where humanity transitioned from being ruled by the sword of the emotional man to being governed by the system of the cold calculator. There was a time in the primitive infancy of power when raw emotion and physical dominance were enough to rule. The chieftain with the greatest rage, the king with the most terrifying wrath, could subjugate a tribe or a kingdom. But emotion is a biological vulnerability. It is an energy source that burns hot and fast, leaving only ash in its wake. The passionate king is predictable. His anger can be baited. His pride can be manipulated. His love can be weaponized. A ruler who feels deeply is a ruler who is blind to the long game, because emotion anchors the mind to the immediate present. The emotionless thinker recognized this fatal flaw millennia ago. They sat in the shadows of the throne rooms as advisors, treasurers, scribes, and high priests. They watched the passionate kings ride off to die in glorious, pointless battles. And while the kings bled out in the mud for honor and pride, the cold thinkers stayed behind to count the gold, rewrite the laws, and draw the new borders. The historical pivot occurred when power fundamentally shifted from physical violence to structural dependency. The emotionless thinker realized that you do not need to conquer a man if you own the roads he travels, the currency he trades, and the laws that govern his disputes. Why risk your life on a battlefield when you can design a system that makes the battlefield irrelevant? This was the birth of the institutional matrix. the thinkers began to construct empires of paper, debt, and bureaucracy. They built systems so vast, so complex, and so deeply ingrained in the daily survival of the common man that to rebel against them was to rebel against reality itself. And the genius of these systems was that they were entirely devoid of emotion. A ledger does not care if you are starving. A legal code does not weep for your sense of justice. A compounded interest rate does not feel pity. By removing emotion from the mechanisms of power, these quiet architects made themselves untouchable. When the masses grew angry, they had no physical tyrant to decapitate. They could only scream at a faceless bureaucracy, punch the stone walls of a bank, or riot against an abstract concept of law. The emotionless thinkers had successfully decentralized their tyranny. They became ghosts in the machine, orchestrating the fate of nations without ever having to raise their voices. Consider the chessboard, the ultimate metaphor for their worldview. The passionate man sees the game as a series of violent clashes. He becomes attached to his knights. He is terrified of losing his queen. He plays with sweat on his brow and a racing pulse, reacting to the immediate threat. The emotionless thinker, however, looks at the board and sees only geometry and probability. To them, the pieces are not soldiers, they are merely units of leverage. The thinker will sacrifice their own king's guard without a second thought if the mathematics dictate a mate in 10 moves. They do not mourn the lost pieces, they only calculate the final configuration. This detachment is not a defect, it is the ultimate evolutionary advantage in the realm of power. Empathy, guilt, and moral hesitation are friction. They slow down decision-making. They introduce irrational variables into logical equations. The men who quietly took control of the world's financial, political, and social systems did so because they lacked this friction. They could look at a map, draw a line through a continent, and displace 1 million lives without their heart rate elevating by a single beat. As history progressed, the systems designed by these cold minds grew exponentially. Feudalism gave way to mercantilism, which evolved into global capitalism and algorithmic governance. The passionate kings of old were replaced by politicians, loud, emotional actors who perform for the public, providing the necessary theater of conflict. But these politicians are merely the modern equivalent of the warlord charging into battle. They are the distraction. The true power remains exactly where it has always been since the historical pivot. In the quiet rooms, with the ledgers, the algorithms, and the grand strategies. The emotionless thinkers control the central banks, the intelligence apparatuses, the corporate monopolies, and the digital architecture of our modern reality. They do not care who wins the elections, just as the ancient scribes did not care which barbarian wore the crown. They control the board, they own the rules. To understand why they rule is to confront a terrifying psychological mirror. The masses are ruled because they want to feel. Humanity is addicted to the drama of its own existence. We crave outrage, we seek validation, we demand passionate leaders who reflect our own turbulent emotions. The emotionless thinkers understand this addiction perfectly. They feed us endless cycles of crisis and resolution, tragedy and triumph, keeping our emotional reservoirs entirely depleted. A population exhausted by its own feelings has no energy left to dismantle the system that enslaves it. In the end, the system is a machine designed to harvest the energy of the passionate, operated by those who feel nothing at all. The historical pivot was not a single moment in time, but a permanent psychological subjugation. The fire of human emotion was contained, commodified, and used to fuel the cold, dark engines of an empire built by ghosts. And as long as we remain slaves to our passions, the quiet, emotionless thinkers will continue to calculate our futures, moving us across their grand, invisible chessboard. Chapter 3. The Hidden Mechanism. To the untrained eye, the world is a chaotic theater of passion. Men and women weep, rage, love, and despair, believing their emotions are the very essence of their freedom. They are convinced that their anger is a revolution, their joy a triumph, and their fear an impenetrable shield. But to the emotionless thinker, the silent, brooding architect standing in the shadows of the grand stage, these passions are not profound. They are merely the gears of a hidden mechanism. In this third chapter of our inquiry, we must strip away the romanticism of the human condition and examine the cold, unyielding machinery of power. Why is it that those who feel the least invariably control those who feel the most? The answer lies in the fundamental nature of emotion itself. Emotion is friction. It is a biological and psychological reflex that demands immediate, predictable action. When a man is angry, he strikes. When he is afraid, he cowers. When he is in love, he surrenders. To the emotionally detached observer, these are not spontaneous acts of free will. They are mathematical certainties. The hidden mechanism of systemic control operates on a singular, chilling principle. Human beings can be steered flawlessly if you control the stimuli that provoke their feelings. The emotionless thinker understands that society is powered by emotional energy, much like a grand furnace is powered by coal. But the man who feeds the coal into the fire does not let himself burn. He remains outside the furnace, his hand quietly resting on the lever, his eyes watching the pressure gauge. Consider the architecture of any grand system, be it a medieval kingdom, a sprawling financial empire, or a modern regime. The masses are kept in a perpetual state of emotional agitation. They are given enemies to hate, tragedies to mourn, and fleeting victories to celebrate. This emotional turbulence is entirely by design. A mind consumed by passion cannot engage in the slow, agonizing process of objective analysis. Passion narrows the vision. It focuses the mind entirely on the immediate threat or the desperate desire. The emotionless thinker, however, operates in a state of chilling tranquility. Unburdened by the intoxicating highs of joy or the paralyzing lows of despair, his mind is a vast, quiet room. He does not react, he calculates. While the masses are swept away by the current of a manufactured crisis, the detached architect is already 3 miles downstream, building the dam that will catch them. This psychological detachment is not born of a lack of intelligence, nor is it necessarily rooted in malice. It is a profound, almost terrifying adaptation to the brutal reality of existence. The emotionless thinker looks upon the chessboard of society and sees exactly that, a chessboard. The pieces are not individuals with souls, dreams, and families. They are merely units of force, possessing specific capabilities and predictable trajectories. A pawn moves one space. A knight moves in an L shape. A frightened populace surrenders its liberties. A greedy aristocracy overreaches. It is all cause and effect, completely devoid of moral weight. When one abandons the need to feel righteous, one gains the ability to be effective. The kings and power figures who have historically shaped the world did not do so because they were the most passionate. They did so because they were the most willing to sacrifice their own humanity for the sake of the mechanism. They wore heavy gold chains not merely as a symbol of wealth, but as a representation of the psychological anchors they used to keep themselves grounded in pure, ruthless pragmatism. Let us observe the nature of this hidden mechanism in practice. It relies entirely on the illusion of choice. The emotionless controller presents the masses with 2 opposing ideologies, 2 conflicting emotional states. The people fight bitterly over these choices, exhausting their resources and their spirits in a war of passions. Yet both choices ultimately serve the same central authority. The system absorbs the energy of their conflict and converts it into stability for the ruler. The architect does not care which side wins so long as the game is played on his board according to his rules. Consider the ancient symbols that have survived the ravages of time, the burning candle slowly melting over an ancient coin, the heavy iron sword resting upon a map of conquered lands. These are not merely artifacts. They are testaments to the triumph of calculation over sentiment. The candle represents the finite nature of human passion. It burns brightly, fiercely, and then extinguishes itself, leaving nothing but wax. The coin, however, remains. It is cold, hard currency, indifferent to the hands that trade it. The emotionless thinker aligns his mind with the coin, not the flame. He understands that passion is a resource to be spent, while detachment is the vault where true power is stored. Those who resist the system often do so with tremendous emotional fervor. They march, they scream, they demand justice. But their anger is anticipated. The hidden mechanism is designed with shock absorbers built specifically to handle the outrage of the masses. The system will yield slightly, offering a token concession, a meaningless victory that soothes the emotional distress of the rebellion. The masses, feeling vindicated, return to their slumber. The emotionless thinker simply adjusts the dials, recalibrates the machine, and continues his silent reign. The rebellion was not a threat. It was merely a stress test for the mechanism. To master the hidden mechanism is to embrace a terrifying isolation. The detached mind walks among the emotionally volatile like a ghost wandering through a crowded market. He sees the strings attached to every limb, the invisible chains of desire and fear that bind every soul. He could reach out and sever these strings, but to what end? A puppet without strings merely collapses into a heap. The system requires the tension of the strings to function. Therefore, the emotionless thinker takes the strings into his own hands. He does not pull them with cruelty, but with the precise, measured force required to keep the grand play moving forward. This is the chilling reality of absolute power. It is not loud. It is not angry. It is deeply, profoundly silent. It is the raw umber and charcoal black of an ancient map charting territories of human vulnerability. It is the broken skull of a marble philosopher, reminding us that even the greatest emotional intellects eventually crumble to dust, while the cold laws of logic remain. As we delve deeper into the psyche of the central authority, we must confront a dark truth. The system does not love you, nor does it hate you. It merely uses you. And the men who operate its levers have sacrificed their own capacity to feel so that they might never be used themselves. They have traded the warmth of the human heart for the cold, invincible steel of the hidden mechanism. In the end, they quietly control entire systems because they are the only ones who realize that life is not a tragedy to be suffered, nor a romance to be celebrated. It is a puzzle to be solved. And while the rest of the world weeps over the broken pieces, the detached mind is already putting them back together, reshaping the board to secure his eternal checkmate. Look at the throne. Observe the figure who sits upon it, crowned in heavy gold and burdened by the gaze of the masses. The crowd cheers for the king. The board of directors applauds the CEO. The citizens revere the charismatic leader. They are bathed in the blinding light of public adoration and scrutiny. But do not be deceived by the loud, shimmering theater of power. The loudest person in the room is rarely the one who designs the architecture of the room. True control does not wear a crown. It stands quietly in the periphery, draped in the cold, unyielding raw umber of the shadows. Welcome to the realm of the gray eminence. In this fourth chapter, we dissect the phenomenon of the shadow advice, the chillingly effective mechanism through which emotionless thinkers quietly dictate the movements of entire systems. To understand the shadow, you must first understand the fundamental vulnerability of the spotlight. Leadership, by its very nature, is an emotional endeavor. The figurehead is driven by a potent, volatile cocktail of ego, pride, legacy, and the perpetual, exhausting fear of losing face. They are tethered to the opinions of the masses. When a leader acts, they must consider how they look, how they sound, and how history will record their name. This emotional taxation creates monumental blind spots. Ego demands constant validation. Pride refuses to retreat even when a battle is lost. Fear forces hasty, reactionary decisions. The emotionless thinker observes this from the dark. They do not crave the spotlight because they understand that the spotlight illuminates flaws just as brightly as it illuminates victories. They view ego not as a tool for greatness, but as a fatal vulnerability, a lever waiting to be pulled. By choosing the background, the shadow advisor sacrifices public credit in exchange for absolute, unmitigated leverage. They operate free from the emotional turbulence that plagues the leader. While the king rages at an insult, the advisor calculates the mathematical probability of a counterattack. How then does the shadow exert such absolute control without ever issuing a public command? The secret lies in the masterful art of inception and the manipulation of the figurehead's ego. The emotionless thinker never forces an idea upon the leader. To demand obedience is to challenge the leader's authority, which would trigger their pride and result in immediate rejection. Instead, the shadow advisor plants seeds in the fertile soil of the leader's vanity. Through carefully constructed questions, selectively presented data, and subtle, calculated whispers, they guide the leader to a predetermined conclusion. A lesser man might retreat, but a visionary like you might see the hidden advantage in a flanking maneuver, the advisor murmurs. Suddenly, the advisor's strategy becomes the leader's brilliant epiphany. The leader executes the plan with the ferocious passion of ownership, entirely unaware that their mind was mapped, navigated, and directed by the silent architect standing just outside their peripheral vision. The shadow happily applauds the leader's genius. Credit is the cheap currency of the ego. Control is the gold standard of the intellect. Over time, this dynamic breeds a deep, unbreakable architecture of dependency. The system becomes a vast, complex machine, and the leader, burdened by the sheer weight of emotional decision-making, begins to lean heavily on the cold clarity of the advisor. The emotionless thinker becomes the sole filter of reality. They decide which reports reach the throne, which threats are amplified, and which dissenting voices are silenced before they even echo in the grand halls. By controlling the flow of information, the shadow controls the perception of the leader. And he who controls a man's perception controls his reality. This is the chilling mastery of the emotionless thinker. They do not need to hold the sword if they are the ones whispering into the ear of the man who wields it. They treat the entire system, the organization, the kingdom, the political landscape, as a grand antique chessboard. The emotional players view the game as a matter of life and death, driven by loyalty, hatred, and honor. The shadow views it merely as a puzzle of physics and probability. Sacrificing a piece is not a tragedy. It is a mathematical necessity for a checkmate. But the most terrifying advantage of the shadow advice reveals itself when the system inevitably faces collapse. No empire lasts forever. When the harvest fails, when the stock plummets, when the war is lost, the emotional masses demand blood. They look to the spotlight. They drag the figurehead from the throne. The king's head rolls. The CEO is publicly disgraced. The charismatic leader is banished. The vessel of ego absorbs the entirety of the destruction. And what of the shadow? The emotionless thinker simply steps further back into the darkness. Because they never claimed the glory, they are immune to the guillotine of public failure. They are perceived merely as the humble servant, the quiet administrator who is only following orders. As the old regime burns to ash, the shadow calmly gathers their ancient maps, their antique coins, and their deep reservoirs of hoarded knowledge. They wait patiently in the ruins. Soon, a new conqueror will arrive, full of fresh ego, burning passion, and desperate ambition. And when that new king sits upon the cold marble of the throne, the shadow will step forward from the deep teal rim light of the periphery, bow respectfully, and begin to whisper all over again. Look closely at the systems you inhabit. Look at your workplaces, your governments, your social hierarchies. Do not waste your time analyzing the loudest voices in the room. Look behind them. Look for the quiet observer, the one whose eyes remain devoid of panic during a crisis, the one who asks the framing questions, the one who holds the ear of the authority. That is where the true power resides. The emotionless thinkers quietly control the world not by conquering it, but but by calmly directing the chaotic, emotional forces of those who believe they do. The world is not governed by those who feel the most, but by those who feel nothing at all when the time comes to make a choice. Welcome to the fifth architecture of power. We have traversed the foundational layers of human psychology, but here we step into the icy stratosphere of true control. In the grand theater of human existence, the masses are intoxicated by the drama. They weep for the fallen, cheer for the charismatic, and burn with the fires of righteous indignation. But look past the stage. Look into the shadows of the wings, up into the dim, quiet galleries where the strings are held. There you will not find passionate heroes or raging tyrants. You will find the emotionless thinker, the silent architect of the system. Strategic dominance is rarely a product of overwhelming force. It is the inevitable result of absolute clarity. Emotion, for all its poetic beauty, is a biological distortion. It is a lens smeared with the grease of ego, fear, hope, and attachment. When a passionate leader looks at a chessboard, they see loyalty in their knights and betrayal in their opposition. They want to protect their queen out of pride. They want to strike the enemy king out of vengeance. The emotionless thinker looks at the exact same board and sees only geometry. They see vectors of probability. They understand that every piece, no matter how grandly carved, is merely an expenditure waiting for the right return on investment. To understand why these cold minds quietly control entire systems, you must first understand the fatal flaw of human passion: predictability. Every emotion is a lever. If a man is driven by greed, his trajectory can be mathematically plotted. You need only leave a trail of gold coins leading to the edge of a cliff. If a man is driven by pride, you need only whisper an insult to make him abandon his fortified position and charge into an ambush. If a man is driven by profound empathy, you weaponize his compassion, forcing him to sacrifice his strategic advantage to save a single pawn. Emotions are algorithms of predictable reaction. The emotionless thinker studies these algorithms with the detached curiosity of a horologist examining the gears of a broken watch. Because they are not bound by these internal compulsions, they become the invisible operators of the machine. Consider the architecture of any massive, enduring system, be it a financial empire, a sprawling political bureaucracy, or a multi-generational institution. These systems are not sustained by enthusiasm. Enthusiasm burns hot and dies quickly, leaving only the ash of burnout. Systems are sustained by cold mechanics: leverage, dependency, routine, and predictable outcomes. The emotionless thinker thrives here because their mind mimics the very nature of the system. They do not get tired. They do not get offended. If a subordinate betrays them, there is no theatrical rage, no dramatic vow of vengeance. There is only a swift, calculated recalibration. The offending element is excised, the gap is filled, and the machine continues to hum. This chilling detachment grants them an almost supernatural patience. The passionate man demands immediate vindication. He wants to see his enemies crushed today. He wants to wear the crown tomorrow. But the emotionless thinker operates on a different temporal plane. They are willing to lose a battle today and another tomorrow, and suffer the mockery of the crowd for a decade if it guarantees absolute checkmate in year 11. They plant seeds in the dark, watering them with the predictable follies of their rivals. When you remove the need for validation, you become invincible. The emotionless thinker does not need the love of the masses. In fact, they actively avoid it. To be loved is to be observed, and to be observed is to be analyzed. The true master of the system prefers the shadows. They will gladly prop up a charismatic, passionate puppet to sit on the gilded throne. Let the puppet wear the heavy crown. Let the puppet bask in the applause of the crowd, and more importantly, let the puppet absorb the hatred and the assassination attempts when the crops fail. The emotionless thinker remains behind the heavy velvet curtains, holding the puppet strings, possessing all the power with none of the liability. This is the profound terror of strategic dominance. It is not loud. It does not announce itself with the beating of war drums or the roaring of cannons. It creeps in like the winter frost, silently hardening the earth and freezing the rivers until the landscape is entirely locked in its grip. By the time the passionate, the angry, and the hopeful realize they are trapped, the gates have already been sealed for years. You might ask, is there no soul in this? Is there no humanity left in the cold calculus of the absolute strategist? The thinker would reply that such questions are irrelevant. Morality, soul, and humanity are the languages of the governed. The governor speaks only the language of cause and effect. They view themselves as the gravity that keeps the planets in orbit. Gravity does not hate the falling man, nor does it love the soaring bird. It simply dictates the absolute rules of reality. To achieve this level of dominance, one must undergo a brutal psychological death. You must take your ego, your desperate need to be right, your fear of humiliation, and your craving for love, and you must drown them in the freezing waters of pure rationality. You must learn to look at your own life, your own resources, and your own allies as pieces of carved marble. You must become a statue in a world of bleeding men. Only then can you see the board as it truly is. Only then can you stop reacting to the noise and start writing the music. The emotionless thinker controls the system because they are the only one not distracted by the illusion of the game. They are the only one who realizes that the board is not made of wood and paint, but of human nature itself. And human nature, in all its chaotic, beautiful, passionate glory, is the easiest thing in the world to control, if you simply refuse to feel it. Listen closely, for what I am about to reveal is the quietest violence known to the human soul. It is a violence that leaves no physical scars, spills no blood, and echoes with no screams. Yet it is the most absolute destruction a human being can undergo. We call it the Stoic Transformation. It is the invisible crucible through which an ordinary, reactive individual must pass to emerge as the emotionless architect of systems. True power, you see, cannot be held by hands that tremble with grief, nor can it be wielded by a heart that races with anger. To control the board, one must first cease to be a piece upon it. The metamorphosis does not begin with a triumphant revelation. It begins with a profound, shattering defeat. Every master of the system was once a victim of it. There was a time when they loved too deeply, trusted too freely, and reacted too fiercely. They believed in the invisible contracts of society, that loyalty would be rewarded, that righteousness would triumph, that their emotional investments would yield a fair return. The world, in its cold and indifferent mechanics, proved them wrong. They were betrayed, outmaneuvered, or crushed by those who operated without the burden of sentiment. In that dark night of the soul, amidst the ruins of their former worldview, a choice was presented: remain soft and be continually broken, or calcify into something the world can no longer bruise. They choose the marble. This is not mere suppression. Suppression is the amateur's game, a leaky dam desperately holding back a reservoir of rage and sorrow, destined to catastrophically fail. The emotionless thinker does not suppress. They transmute. They undergo an internal alchemy where the raw, volatile energy of emotion is stripped of its heat and converted into cold, hard data. Anger, they realize, is nothing but a leash handed freely to their enemies. If a rival can make them angry, that rival controls their focus. Joy is a vulnerability, a blind spot that makes one complacent. Fear is merely a lack of information. By dissecting their feelings under the harsh, clinical light of extreme rationality, they amputate their own psychological reactivity. Imagine the mind as a grand, chaotic medieval court. The king is constantly bombarded by screaming advisors: panic, pride, love, and vengeance. The Stoic Transformation is the moment the king stands up, draws a rusted iron sword, and quietly executes them all. The court falls dead silent, the noise stops, and in that terrifying, echoing void, absolute clarity is born. Once the internal noise is silenced, the thinker begins to observe the world with chilling acuity. Because they are no longer blinded by what they want to happen or terrified by what they fear might happen, they simply see what is. They watch the frantic emotional masses scurrying through the labyrinth of society, entirely predictable in their desires and terrors. The thinkers realize that human emotion is the ultimate predictable algorithm. People will always move toward comfort and away from pain. They will always protect their egos. They will always crave validation. To the emotionless thinker, these human traits are no longer relatable experiences. They are levers and pulleys in a grand machine. This brings us to the architecture of their control. They build their empires quietly, sitting in the shadows of the very systems they manipulate. They do not seek the spotlight, for vanity is an emotion, and emotion is a flaw. Instead, they position themselves at the structural choke points of power. They become the indispensable advisors, the silent financiers, the unseen strategists. When a crisis strikes and the masses panic, the emotionless thinker does not blink. While others are paralyzed by the terror of a collapsing market, a political upheaval, or a corporate ruin, the Stoic mind is already running a calculus of opportunity. They buy when there is blood in the streets. They advance when others retreat. They are the immovable stone against which the waves of human hysteria break and recede. You might ask, is there a cost to this metamorphosis? Does the king in the shadows not mourn the loss of his own humanity? The chilling answer is no. Once the transformation is complete, looking back at their former emotional self is like looking at a foolish child. They do not miss the anxiety, the heartbreak, or the desperate need to be understood. They have traded the chaotic warmth of the human experience for the dark, absolute serenity of control. They sit upon a throne of their own making, crowned not with gold, but with the heavy iron of indifference. This emotional detachment makes them practically invincible in the arena of power. You cannot threaten a person who does not fear loss. You cannot bribe a person who does not crave luxury. You cannot manipulate a person who does not seek your approval. They are a psychological fortress of black stone and deep shadows. When you sit across the chessboard from them, you are not playing against a human being. You are playing against gravity itself. They will wait. They will let you exhaust yourself with your brilliant, passionate gambits. And when you inevitably overextend, driven by your ego or your desperation, they will quietly, methodically, and without a single ounce of malice, dismantle your entire world. They do not hate the system. They do not hate you. Hate requires energy. They simply recognize the board and they move the pieces where they belong. The Stoic transformation is complete. The human has died and the architect has awakened. And as they look upon the vast, sprawling machinery of the world they now quietly rule, they feel absolutely nothing, which is exactly why they control it all. We have arrived at the precipice. This is the final threshold of our discourse, the terminus where illusions go to die and the raw, unvarnished machinery of the world is laid bare. You have walked through the corridors of human psychology, observed the strings that bind the masses, and witnessed the silent architects who pull them. Now, in this concluding chapter, I deliver the final warning. It is not a warning of an impending storm. The storm has been raging since the dawn of civilization. Rather, it is the chilling realization that you are the one generating its winds, entirely for the benefit of someone who does not feel the rain. Look around you. The grand theater of society is a cacophony of outrage, passion, despair, and fleeting triumphs. People bleed for ideologies, weep for fallen idols, and scream into the digital void, believing their emotions are a testament to their humanity. They are not. To the emotionless thinker, your emotions are not a testament to your soul. They are a predictable, harvestable energy source. Emotion is the combustion engine of society, and the cold, detached minds are the engineers who harness its power without ever touching the flames. Why do they control entire systems? Because they are the only ones who can see the system for what it truly is, a chessboard. When you are consumed by the heat of the moment, your vision narrows. Anger makes you predictable. Fear makes you compliant. Love makes you vulnerable. You react to the piece directly in front of you, swinging blindly in the dark. The emotionless thinker does not react. They observe, they calculate, they anticipate. While you are mourning the loss of a pawn, they are silently maneuvering their knight to corner your king. They do not hate you, they do not love you. To them, you are merely a variable in an equation they have already solved. History is written by the passionate, but it is plotted by the cold. Think of the ancient kings who sat upon shadowy thrones, their faces unreadable masks of authority. They did not rule by screaming their decrees. They ruled through the terrifying weight of their silence. A leader who loses their temper loses their power. The true sovereigns of this world, whether they sit in medieval castles draped in deep crimson or in modern, dimly lit boardrooms, understand that the absence of reaction is the ultimate form of dominance. When you cannot be provoked, you cannot be controlled. This brings us to the architecture of your own prison. The emotionless thinker rarely has to build the walls that confine you. They merely supply the bricks of controversy, the mortar of tribalism, and let your own passions do the heavy lifting. You forge your own chains out of your desperate need to be heard, to be right, to be validated. Every time you react impulsively to a headline, every time you let outrage dictate your actions, you are willfully stepping into a cage designed by a mind that feels nothing. They map out your psychological triggers like an ancient cartographer charting the stars, knowing exactly which buttons to press to make the masses dance to a silent tune. You may ask yourself, is it not cruel to live without feeling? Is it not a tragedy to strip the heart of its warmth? That is the question of a pawn. The architect does not concern themselves with the poetry of warmth. They are concerned with the physics of power. They have calcified their hearts because they recognize that in a world governed by ruthless pragmatism, an exposed heart is a fatal liability. They wear a crown of thorns not as a symbol of suffering, but as a reminder that pain is merely an electrical signal to the brain, a signal they have learned to mute. The final warning is this: the system is not broken. It is functioning exactly as it was designed. The chaos, the division, the perpetual state of emotional exhaustion you feel, these are not glitches in the matrix. They are its core features. They are the mechanisms by which the emotional majority is kept distracted, divided, and powerless, while the emotionless minority quietly consolidates control. The burning candles of your passions are melting away your autonomy, leaving nothing but the cold, hard gold of absolute authority for those who stand in the shadows. If you wish to survive, if you wish to step out of the engine room and into the architect's seat, you must undergo a brutal metamorphosis. You must learn to separate your perception from your reaction. You must view your own mind as an antique bookshelf filled with dangerous tomes of instinct and bias, and choose to lock them away. When the world demands your anger, give it silence. When the system demands your fear, give it a cold, unblinking stare. You must become the marble statue amidst a sea of fragile glass, unmoved, unbothered, and unbroken. The board is set. The ancient coins have been weighed. The shadows are creeping across the map. You now know the secret of the silent kings and the detached philosophers. You know why the emotionless thinkers quietly inherit the earth. The illusion has been shattered. What you do with this knowledge is entirely up to you. But remember this: the next time you feel the irresistible urge to react, to let your emotions dictate your next move, there is someone in the dark watching you and quietly whispering, "Checkmate."